300 billion cubic meters. That is how much groundwater humans extract every year. Up to 70% of it goes to cities, factories, and dense urban areas like yours. Beneath your feet, pumps run all day and all night. No public meters. No visible limits. The ground does not break. It sinks. In several megacities, land drops 2 to 5 centimeters each year. After 10 years, foundations are lower. After 20, the damage cannot be reversed. In Jakarta, parts of the city have sunk more than half a meter in just a few decades. In Mexico City, entire districts tilt unevenly, forcing residents to relevel floors every few years. In Bangkok, engineers now design buildings under the assumption that the ground will continue to sink for the rest of their lifespan. None of these cities collapsed overnight. Life continued while the ground slowly changed shape. In one neighborhood of a large city, daily routines still look normal. Houses stand. Electricity works. Shops open on time. From the street, nothing appears wrong. Inside the buildings, small problems begin to surface. Doors scrape against the floor. Windows no longer align with their frames. Thin cracks run along walls that were straight only a few years ago. In some homes, tiles lift by 1 or 2 centimeters. Residents fix what they can see. A raised threshold. Extra concrete. A reinforced column. Local authorities describe the issue as natural ground settlement. Seasonal movement. Normal aging of structures. There is no emergency notice because nothing fails at once. People stay because repairs feel manageable. Businesses continue because infrastructure still functions. What remains invisible lies beneath the surface. Dozens of deep wells drilled over decades. Pumps running daily. Water pulled from underground layers that took centuries to refill. As the water disappears, pressure drops. Soil compresses. The ground lowers permanently. The process is slow enough to ignore, but fast enough to change the city before anyone stops it. Groundwater is not a marginal resource. It is one of the main pillars holding modern cities together. Globally, groundwater supplies roughly 30% of all freshwater used by humans. In urban and industrial regions, the share is often much higher. In parts of South and Southeast Asia, groundwater provides more than half of all city water. In some industrial zones, it reaches 70 to 80%. The scale of extraction is large and continuous. Each year, humans pump around 300 billion cubic meters of groundwater worldwide. To visualize that volume, it equals hundreds of millions of Olympic-sized swimming pools emptied annually from underground layers. Unlike surface reservoirs, most of this extraction happens out of sight. There are no visible dams, no drying riverbeds, no daily headlines. Urban growth drives this demand. Since 1970, the global urban population has more than doubled. Cities expanded faster than water infrastructure. Treating surface water requires time, land, and political coordination. Drilling wells is cheaper and faster. One permit, one machine. Water starts flowing. In cities like Delhi, Jakarta, and Manila, tens of thousands of private and industrial wells operate simultaneously. Many are unregistered. Others are licensed but rarely monitored for actual volume. The result is a fragmented system where no authority has a complete picture of how much water is being removed. Agriculture adds further pressure at the urban edge. Around 70% of global freshwater use goes to farming, much of it drawn from groundwater. As cities grow outward, farms and factories compete for the same underground supply. The water table drops. Wells are drilled deeper. Pumps become stronger. Energy use increases. Costs rise quietly. The physical consequences lag behind the extraction. Groundwater systems respond slowly. In many aquifers, water levels drop 1 to 3 meters per year during periods of heavy use. In some regions of northern China and India, declines of more than 10 meters have been recorded over a decade. These numbers do not appear dramatic at street level. Underground, they are structural. Once pressure inside an aquifer falls, the surrounding soil compacts. Clay-rich layers are especially vulnerable. Unlike water, compressed soil does not rebound. Even if pumping stops, the lost volume remains lost. This is why subsidence continues even after extraction slows. Cities often fail to connect cause and effect because the timeline is long. Buildings crack years after wells are drilled. Flooding worsens decades later. By then, responsibility is diffused across agencies, companies, and past decisions. The problem is not confined to one region. From California's Central Valley to Iran's plateau, from coastal megacities to inland capitals, the pattern repeats. Invisible extraction, delayed damage, permanent ground loss. This is not a future risk. It is a process already underway beneath the cities you recognize. Groundwater feels safe because it disappears slowly. That is the paradox at the center of the system. Cities treat groundwater as a backup, but use it as a primary supply. In many regions, groundwater extraction already exceeds natural recharge. Shallow aquifers may refill within years. Deeper aquifers often require hundreds, sometimes thousands of years. When cities pump faster than recharge, they are not borrowing water. They are consuming stored reserves. This imbalance is not theoretical. In parts of northern China, groundwater withdrawal has exceeded recharge rates by more than 2 times for decades. In large areas of India, water tables have dropped steadily as extraction increased to support cities and irrigation. These declines do not stop when rainfall improves. They reflect long-term structural loss. When groundwater is removed, it does not leave behind empty space waiting to refill. Water inside an aquifer supports the surrounding soil through pressure. As water levels fall, that pressure weakens. Soil particles move closer together. Clay layers compress. This compression reduces the volume of the ground itself. The critical point is permanence. Once soil compacts, it does not expand again. Even if water levels later stabilize or recover slightly, the ground remains lower. This is why land subsidence continues even after pumping slows. Mexico City demonstrates this effect clearly. Regulations reduced groundwater extraction in certain zones decades ago. Despite this, parts of the city continued to sink for years afterward. The compaction had already occurred. The damage was locked into the ground. In California's Central Valley, subsidence followed a similar pattern. Over the past century, land sank more than 8 meters in some areas. During the drought between 2012 and 2016, intensive pumping caused additional drops of more than 60 centimeters in a few years. Even when surface water returned, the land did not rise. The volume was permanently lost. The physical process is slow enough to escape attention. Subsidence happens in centimeters per year, not meters per day. Buildings do not collapse. Roads do not crack overnight. This gradual pace allows cities to adjust instead of stop. Repairs replace prevention. From a financial perspective, groundwater appears efficient. Drilling wells is cheaper than building treatment plants or reservoirs. Maintenance costs are spread over time. The immediate benefits are visible. The long-term costs remain abstract. This delay distorts decision-making. Developers focus on short project timelines. Municipal budgets operate on annual cycles. Political leadership changes every few years. The consequences of groundwater extraction emerge decades later, often under different administrations. The paradox deepens in coastal cities. As land sinks, flood risk increases even without heavier rainfall. A drop of just a few centimeters per year compounds over time. Lower ground means higher exposure to tides and storm surges. In these areas, subsidence amplifies the effects of sea level rise without being part of climate projections. Groundwater also masks its own depletion. When water levels drop, wells are drilled deeper. Pumps become stronger. Supply appears stable. The cost shifts to energy use and infrastructure stress, not immediate scarcity. This creates the illusion that the system is still working. In some regions, extracted groundwater is extremely old. Studies have shown that parts of the water used today entered the ground thousands of years ago. Using it is closer to mining than consumption. Once removed, it will not return on any human planning horizon. This is the central contradiction. Groundwater supports growth now, but weakens the ground beneath that growth. The benefits arrive early and visibly. The damage arrives late and invisibly. Cities continue extracting because the system does not fail fast enough to force change. By the time subsidence becomes undeniable, The physical conditions have already shifted. The city must operate on altered ground. At that point, stopping extraction can prevent further damage, but it cannot restore what has been lost. The paradox is not ignorance. It is timing. Groundwater allows cities to postpone hard decisions, while ensuring that those decisions become harder later. Beneath the city, the pumps continue to run. They do not pause at night. They do not adjust to seasons unless electricity fails. In many places, they are older than the buildings above them. They draw from aquifers that formed long before the city existed. Groundwater extraction often looks invisible because its effects are delayed. The water leaves first. The damage appears later. By the time streets tilt and pipes crack, the extraction that caused it has already happened. In many aquifers, the water removed today will not return within your lifetime. Some cities try to adapt. Jakarta raises sea walls and expands pumping stations. Bangkok restricts new wells and invests in surface water. California enforces groundwater management plans after decades of decline. These measures reduce future damage. They do not undo what is already compressed underground. Once soil compacts, it stays compacted. Even if groundwater levels stabilize, the ground remains lower. This means flood defenses must be permanent. Drainage systems must be redesigned. Infrastructure budgets must cover maintenance instead of improvement. The cost becomes structural. The burden does not fall evenly. Areas built on soft sediment suffer first. Communities with fewer resources absorb repeated repair costs. Displacement happens slowly. One household leaves, then another. Over time, neighborhoods change without formal relocation plans. From above, the city still looks functional. Roads carry traffic. Buildings remain occupied. Economic activity continues. This makes the problem easy to postpone. It also makes it expensive to solve. Groundwater allowed cities to grow faster than their natural limits. It supported industry, housing, and agriculture when surface water was insufficient. That flexibility created prosperity. It also shifted risk forward in time. The benefit arrived early. The cost arrived later. What remains now is a choice between management and denial. Managing groundwater means measuring extraction, limiting use, and accepting higher short-term costs for long-term stability. Denial means continuing until repairs dominate budgets and options narrow further. Cities built on groundwater are not doomed, but they are constrained. Their future depends less on how much water they can access, and more on how much ground they can afford to lose. The pumps will keep running unless systems change. The ground will keep settling unless extraction slows. These processes do not announce themselves. They proceed quietly, beneath the city you use every day. The system that drains groundwater rarely looks like exploitation. It looks like routine urban management. No single authority controls it. No single actor benefits alone. Thousands of small decisions combine into a machine that runs continuously. It often begins with growth. A city expands faster than its water infrastructure. Surface water becomes polluted or unreliable. New treatment plants require land, funding, and years of planning. Drilling wells requires permits, equipment, and weeks. For many developers and municipalities, groundwater becomes the fastest solution. In Jakarta, private wells supply office towers, hotels, shopping centers, and residential complexes. Many wells were drilled decades ago, before strict controls existed. Some are licensed, many are not. Even licensed wells are rarely monitored for real extraction volumes. Meter readings, when present, are often self-reported. The cumulative impact remains unknown. In Delhi, groundwater supports both households and commerce. During dry seasons, apartment buildings rely on bore wells. Water tankers fill from private wells and deliver across the city. Each tanker represents water removed from underground storage and sold as a commodity. Tracking total extraction across tens of thousands of such transactions is nearly impossible. Mexico City relied on groundwater for decades to support expansion beyond surface water limits. Wells delivered stability. Costs appeared manageable. Over time, uneven subsidence damaged metro lines, roads, and pipelines. Maintenance became routine. The original cause faded into the background. Industrial zones intensify the system. Factories need stable water pressure. Interruptions disrupt production. Groundwater offers reliability. In coastal manufacturing hubs across Southeast Asia, industrial wells often operate continuously. Shutting down pumps risks downtime. Production targets override recharge concerns. Agriculture connects directly to this machine. Globally, around 70% of freshwater use goes to farming, much of it from groundwater. In India, more than 20 million tube wells support irrigation. During drought years, extraction rises sharply. Water tables drop. Farmers drill deeper. Pumps become stronger. Energy use increases. Costs rise, but production continues. Northern China follows a similar pattern. In provinces surrounding Beijing, groundwater supports both crops and urban demand. Monitoring data show water table declines of more than 1 meter per year in some periods. As wells deepen, older groundwater enters circulation. Recharge slows further. Regulation struggles to keep pace. Groundwater flows across administrative boundaries. One district may restrict pumping while a neighboring area continues unrestricted. Aquifers span regions. Local enforcement cannot address regional depletion. Even when regulations exist, enforcement is difficult. Wells are often on private land. Inspections require time and manpower. Illegal wells can be drilled quickly and hidden easily. Closing one well has little visible effect. The system absorbs the change. Economic incentives reinforce extraction. Developers lower construction costs by avoiding water infrastructure investments. Factories secure supply without negotiating shared resources. Municipalities postpone expensive upgrades. Each decision appears rational in isolation. Together, they create long-term damage. The financial signals arrive late. Subsidence increases maintenance costs gradually. Roads require frequent resurfacing. Sewers lose slope and need pumping upgrades. Flood defenses must rise. In Jakarta, annual flood mitigation spending increased sharply as subsidence amplified tidal flooding. These costs rarely appear in groundwater budgets. They surface elsewhere. Technology does not solve the problem automatically. Stronger pumps reach deeper layers. Deeper wells access older water with slower recharge. In some regions, groundwater extracted today entered the ground thousands of years ago. Using it is similar to mining, not consumption. Monitoring remains fragmented. Some cities install smart meters. Others rely on estimates. Many lack complete aquifer maps. Without shared data, authorities respond to symptoms instead of causes. Flooding leads to levees. Cracked buildings lead to reinforcement. Extraction continues. The machine persists because it stays invisible. There is no shutdown moment. No dramatic failure. Water flows. Cities function. The ground adapts slowly until it cannot. By the time subsidence becomes a political issue, the damage is already embedded underground. The system has done its work. Quietly, legally, and over decades. The consequences of groundwater extraction do not appear all at once. They spread across regions, shaped by geology, population density, and infrastructure quality. The pattern is consistent. The damage is not. In Jakarta, land subsidence has reached up to 25 centimeters per year in parts of the northern city. Over several decades, some districts have sunk more than 4 meters. Entire neighborhoods now sit below sea level. Flooding no longer depends on storms. Regular high tides are enough. Pumping stations operate daily. Without them, water rises within hours. Bangkok experienced a similar trajectory earlier. During the 1980s and 1990s, excessive groundwater extraction caused subsidence rates of more than 10 centimeters per year in some areas. Regulations later reduced pumping, but the ground continued to settle. Roads and rail systems now require constant realignment. Infrastructure maintenance became a permanent cost. Mexico City shows how uneven subsidence reshapes a city. Built on the sediments of an ancient lake, the ground compresses at different rates. Some districts have sunk more than 9 meters since the early 20th century. Buildings tilt. Metro lines require repeated adjustments. Water pipes crack as the ground shifts. Leaks increase water loss. More groundwater is pumped to compensate, reinforcing the cycle. In California's San Joaquin Valley, groundwater extraction for agriculture caused land subsidence exceeding 8 meters over the past century. During the drought between 2012 and 2016, some areas sank over 60 centimeters in just a few years. Canals lost capacity as slopes flattened. Surface water deliveries declined. Farmers relied even more on groundwater. Northern China illustrates the regional scale of impact. In parts of Hebei province, groundwater levels dropped over 40 meters across several decades. Subsidence zones now cover thousands of square kilometers. Roads crack. Rail lines require reinforcement. Flood risk increases even without heavier rainfall because the land surface sits lower. Coastal deltas face additional pressure. In Vietnam's Mekong Delta, groundwater extraction contributes to subsidence rates of 1 to 3 centimeters per year. Combined with rising sea levels, this accelerates saltwater intrusion. Freshwater supplies degrade. Rice yields decline. Farmers adapt by drilling deeper or shifting crops, increasing extraction further. Iran's Central Plateau presents another form of damage. Around Tehran, excessive pumping caused ground fissures stretching hundreds of meters. These cracks widen gradually, damaging roads and buildings. They do not trigger emergencies. They persist. Urban infrastructure absorbs much of the cost. Drainage systems lose slope. Sewers designed for gravity flow require pumps. In subsiding cities, stormwater systems built decades ago no longer function as intended. Flood events become more frequent. Each repair treats a symptom, not the cause. The social impact follows predictable lines. Lower-income neighborhoods are often built on softer ground or low-lying areas. These zones flood first and recover last. Residents face repeated repair costs. Insurance becomes unavailable or unaffordable. Property values decline unevenly. Displacement happens gradually, without formal relocation plans. What connects these places is not climate alone. Many affected regions do not experience heavier rainfall. The common factor is subsidence. Lower land elevation changes how water behaves. It alters drainage patterns. It increases exposure to tides and floods. It weakens infrastructure designed for stable ground. The map of consequences already exists. It spans megacities, agricultural valleys, and coastal deltas. Different economies, different political systems. The same mechanism. Water leaves the ground. The ground settles. Cities adjust until adjustment becomes permanent damage. By the time subsidence becomes impossible to ignore, the landscape has already changed. In northern Jakarta, the crisis did not begin with evacuation orders. It began with maintenance schedules. Streets required resurfacing more often. Drainage pumps ran longer each year. Floodgates closed earlier during routine high tides. Engineers noticed that ground levels were dropping faster than projected. In districts such as Muara Baru and Plut, subsidence reached 10 to 15 centimeters per year during peak extraction periods. Over time, parts of these neighborhoods fell more than 4 meters below sea level. Houses remained standing. The damage appeared inside. Floors sank below road level. Rainwater flowed inward. Saltwater entered drains during normal tides. Residents adapted in stages. First, they raised door frames. Then they added concrete layers to floors, often 30 to 40 centimeters at a time. Some homes show 3 or 4 stacked renovations, each marking an earlier floodline. These adjustments worked for a while. Then the ground dropped again. There was no official relocation deadline. Families left one by one. Shops closed gradually. Streets lost activity. What remained were pumping stations and reinforced walls holding back water that now sat higher than the land behind them. The city responded with infrastructure. Jakarta invested billions of dollars in flood control projects, including expanded pumping systems and a large coastal barrier. These measures reduced immediate flooding. They did not stop subsidence. The ground continued to sink behind the defenses. Maintenance costs increased. Energy use rose. Dependence on mechanical systems became permanent. Mexico City faced a different version of the same turning point. In the late 20th century, uneven subsidence began affecting transport infrastructure. Metro lines required repeated realignment. Line 12 experienced closures as tracks warped and supports shifted. In some zones, land dropped 20 to 30 centimeters over a decade, enough to strain structures not designed for constant deformation. Repairs addressed surface alignment. Underground conditions remained unchanged. Cracked water pipes leaked large volumes of treated water before reaching households. Estimates indicate that over 30% of the city's water supply is lost through leakage. To compensate, pumping increased elsewhere, reinforcing the underlying cause. In California's Central Valley, the climax arrived during drought. Between 2012 and 2016, reduced surface water deliveries forced farmers to rely heavily on groundwater. In some areas, land subsidence exceeded 60 centimeters in just a few years. Canals carrying surface water flattened and lost capacity. Billions of dollars in infrastructure required reinforcement. Even when rains returned, the land did not recover. The compaction was permanent. Water managers shifted from expansion to damage control. The focus moved from increasing supply to maintaining what remained functional. These moments mark the system's turning point. Not because the damage suddenly appears, but because adaptation becomes more expensive than prevention ever was. Cities cross a threshold where maintaining stability requires constant intervention. The people most affected are rarely those who benefited most from groundwater extraction. Industrial users relocate. Developers move to higher ground. Long-term residents remain. They absorb repeated repair costs. Flood insurance becomes unavailable. Public services degrade. At this stage, reducing extraction slows future damage but does not reverse existing loss. Aquifers may stabilize. Water levels may rise slightly. The ground remains compressed. Cities must now operate on altered terrain. The climax is not dramatic. It is administrative. Budgets shift. Maintenance lines grow. Emergency systems become permanent. What once supported growth now demands constant defense. This is the point where groundwater extraction stops being a water issue. It becomes a land issue, a structural issue, a long-term constraint on how a city can function. Collapse does not arrive as a single event. It appears as rising operating costs, shrinking safety margins, and systems that no longer function as designed. In subsiding cities, infrastructure loses its assumptions. Roads were built with fixed slopes. Sewers relied on gravity. Drainage systems assumed stable ground. When land sinks by a few centimeters each year, those assumptions fail. In Bangkok, sections of the drainage network now require permanent pumping because gravity flow no longer works. Energy costs rise every year, not during emergencies, but as routine operation. Mexico City shows how subsidence turns water systems against themselves. Uneven ground movement fractures pipelines repeatedly. Leaks waste treated water before it reaches homes. Estimates indicate that more than 30% of supplied water is lost through damaged pipes. To meet demand, authorities increase pumping elsewhere. This adds pressure to aquifers and accelerates further subsidence. The system consumes more water to compensate for damage caused by water extraction. Flood risk increases without changes in rainfall. In Jakarta, areas that flooded only during storms now flood during ordinary high tides. Pump stations must operate daily. If power fails, water rises immediately. Safety depends on uninterrupted electricity and maintenance. What was once a natural drainage problem becomes a mechanical dependency. Housing absorbs the impact unevenly. Buildings in wealthier districts are elevated or reinforced. Insurance remains available. In lower-income neighborhoods, repeated repairs drain savings. Floors are raised, then raised again. Streets become uneven. Insurance coverage disappears. Property values decline in the most affected zones, trapping residents who cannot afford to move. Displacement follows a slow pattern. There are no mass evacuations. Families leave one at a time. Shops close gradually. Schools lose enrollment. Over years, neighborhoods hollow out without formal relocation plans. The city changes without acknowledging the cause. Rural regions experience collapse differently. In California's Central Valley, subsidence damaged major canals that deliver surface water. As slopes flattened, capacity dropped. Less surface water meant more groundwater pumping. During dry years, this feedback loop intensified. Even in wet years, infrastructure could not recover its original performance. Northern China shows similar long-term effects. Subsidence damaged highways and rail lines, requiring repeated reinforcement. Budgets shifted from expansion to maintenance. Economic activity slowed not because resources disappeared, but because stability became expensive. These outcomes accumulate slowly enough to avoid crisis declarations. Each repair appears manageable. Each budget increase seems temporary. Over time, cities enter a defensive state. Growth plans shrink. Infrastructure spending rises just to maintain basic function. The timing complicates accountability. Many extraction decisions were made decades earlier. The officials, companies, and households involved often no longer exist in the same form. Responsibility diffuses across time and institutions. The cost remains. At this stage, stopping extraction prevents further damage but cannot restore what is lost. Compacted soil does not expand. Lower ground does not rise. Cities must adapt to new baselines. The collapse is not dramatic. It is administrative and financial. Maintenance replaces development. Defense replaces growth. Stability becomes a service that must be purchased every year. Once the ground assumption fails, every system above it becomes provisional. Roads, pipes, housing, and drainage all depend on constant correction. The city still functions, but only through continuous effort. Collapse, in this context, is not destruction. It is permanence under constraint. Beneath the city, the pumps keep running. They do not slow down at night. They do not adjust to seasons unless electricity fails. In many places, they are older than the buildings above them. They draw from aquifers that formed long before the city existed. Groundwater extraction remains easy to ignore because its effects arrive late. Water leaves first. Damage appears years or decades later. By the time streets tilt and pipes crack, the extraction that caused it has already passed. In many aquifers, the water removed today will not return within any human planning horizon. Some cities attempt to manage the risk. Jakarta expands pumping stations and raises sea walls. Bangkok restricts new wells and shifts toward surface water. California enforces groundwater management plans after decades of decline. These actions slow future damage. They do not undo past compaction. Once soil compresses, it stays compressed. Even if groundwater levels stabilize, the ground remains lower. This means flood defenses must be permanent. Drainage systems must be redesigned. Infrastructure budgets must cover maintenance instead of improvement. The cost becomes structural. The burden does not fall evenly. Areas built on soft sediment sink faster. Lower-income neighborhoods absorb repeated repair costs. Displacement happens gradually, without announcements. One household leaves, then another. Over time, neighborhoods change without formal relocation. From above, the city still looks functional. Traffic moves. Buildings remain occupied. Economic activity continues. This makes the problem easy to postpone. It also makes it expensive to confront. Groundwater allowed cities to grow beyond their natural limits. It supported industry, housing, and agriculture when surface water was insufficient. That flexibility delivered short-term stability. It also shifted long-term risk underground. What remains is a choice between management and inertia. Managing groundwater requires measurement, limits, and coordination across regions. It demands higher costs now to avoid permanent loss later. Inertia allows extraction to continue until maintenance dominates budgets and options narrow. Cities built on groundwater are not doomed, but they are constrained. Their future depends less on how much water they can access, and more on how much ground they are willing to lose. The pumps will keep running unless systems change. The ground will keep settling unless extraction slows. These processes do not announce themselves. They proceed quietly, beneath the city you live in every day. And once the ground changes, it does not change back.